Hey everyone, thank you, Ben. Yes, I am so excited. Like Ben said, we've been working with just people throughout the community. We had a town hall to sort of hear from the community what we should even talk about today. One of the great problems we have is that there's now more happening on the immersive web than we can fit in a one-day event. So we had to reach out to a lot of people and sort of hear what was important to you. And the general theme of the day is to look at where we are right now as a community, to look at sort of how we've come to the point that we are, the things that we can do now, and then also to look forward a little bit, to look forward and see where there are gaps that we need to fill in the next year or two, and then even the vision of where we want to be even longer term. So I'm really excited about the people that we have scheduled to talk today. I think my job will be relatively easy because there are a lot of really smart people who are doing incredible work. So my job is just to tee them up with the good questions and then let them run with those answers. But I do have a little bit of work to do before we can jump into that. And that is to sort of set the stage so that we're all kind of on the same page about what. Hi, Ricardo, everyone at the event today. Not sure that was supposed to happen, but so one thing I will do today is sort of set the stage and say, here's the broader context of what we're talking about. And I'll sort of cover some of the key terms so that as people throw them into the interviews, you're on the same page with what they mean and where they fit into the big vision. And I'll just take a few minutes to do that. Don't worry, it won't be very long. We will be going into the interviews and the panels as quickly as possible, but let's just do a quick 3 or 4 minutes about the context. So, okay, we all have different terms for this. We have the immersive web, we have the metaverse, we have WebXR, we have spatial computing. I use this term called the wider web. It means some very specific thing, but we're all generally talking about the same thing. But I wanted to sort of take a few minutes to talk about this because I think it's a handy frame. There's 3 parts to the wider web when I talk about it. There are the display modes. So in the past, we've had one display mode, which is basically flat screen and a little bit of change. We have control types like keyboard and mouse and things like touchscreens and now wands and voices. And then we have different types of controls or page controls, overlay controls, or now spatial 3D controls. So there's sort of 3 big parts, and I'll go through each of them. Okay, so we have these 3 display modes. Like I said, for a long time, the web was just flat. We had CRT sitting on desks, and then we added another flat type, which was the smartphone and the tablet format. And we did a lot of work for more than a decade to come up with responsive design that handled smoothly changing between those 2 types of flat displays. And that took a ton of work. And all of the complexity of CSS and the complexity of media queries that let you do different things for different kinds of flat displays, those core ideas actually set the web up to be in a good place as we now merge into 2 additional display types, that being the portal display and the immersive display. So the immersive display is what you think of when you think of VR or AR glasses. Those are things you wear on your head. They're either see-through or opaque. And so a lot of the people that we'll have on today will talk about immersive displays as their sort of default when they're talking about WebXR. But the thing to remember is that when we designed WebXR, we specifically made it to be responsive and to handle whatever hardware people showed up with. So if they show up with a smartphone, they can view the content just on the regular flat display. They can use it as a portal into a space by holding it up and getting those types of motion information. And then immersive displays, of course, are either here today for VR or a little bit further out for AR. So that's one aspect of the wider web. The next aspect is that in addition to having those display modes, now we have 3 control types. So we have sort of in-page controls. That's what you think of when you think about normal HTML with buttons and links and text and images. Those are called page controls. And then if you're in the portal mode with your handheld and you're looking into a space through a flat screen, those are overlay controls. So those are controls that seem to sort of sit on top of the world. And then for both portal mode and for immersive displays, you have spatial controls. And so there's a whole industry and literature of industrial design that teaches us how to make 3D tactile controls in the world in 3D. And so we're bringing in this whole new genre of design capability for spatial controls. One theme that you'll notice is that with the wider web, we're adding complexity. So all of the complexity of responsive design for the flat web is now being sort of exploded, becoming exponentially more complex, because we're not just designing for a couple of flat modes in all page controls. We're designing for 3 display modes and 3 control types. And the third part of it is new input types. So not only is what we're showing, but the interaction that we're talking about on the wider web is vastly more complex. We're tracking hands now. We're tracking wands or the kinds of controllers that you get when you buy a VR headset. And then also we're listening to voices. And then coming down the pipe, we have things like eye tracking and the facial tracking. So we actually are tracking, the expressions that you have on your face. These all combine together into this thing called the wider web, and it's sort of vastly complex. And so that is what we will be talking about today, where we are today with immersive browsers, where we are today with web APIs, and where we are today with the tool chains that sort of fit around all of that. And so I won't go through all of this, but this is, within the context of the web browser, there's sort of several layers of technology that we talk about. At the bottom layer, you have the hardware. You have smartphones and PCs, XR glasses, or wearables like watches. Above that, you have the browser that provides the web APIs. So I'll go through a few of these because we'll talk about them a lot today. WebAssembly is basically a faster way to run code than JavaScript. So it has a lot of other capabilities that it brings to the table, but for XR, the thing to remember is that it lets us write code that runs at native speeds. JavaScript has typically been a little bit slower than if you write in a native language like C++ or Rust. WebAssembly brings those speeds to browsers. WebXR is the API that lets the browser talk to headsets and get information like information about the environment, like planes and things like that. Web Audio brings spatial audio. Web GPU lets us display graphics quickly. And WebRTC is all about communicating between the browser and servers or other browsers. Got the graphics engines. We'll talk about those today, physics engines. And then above that, you have app frameworks like 3JS or Babylon or Potassium ES. And these are engines that sort of wrap it all up and make it so that web developers don't have to know about all of the complexity of these things. And then on top of that is the application code. And so later in the day, we'll talk about education and privacy and lots of different advertising, lots of different sort of applications that we use. And finally, there's all the services. So I'm going to wrap this up by just saying, a lot of the work that has gone into XR today is about making sure that the browser is capable of doing XR, but there's a whole set of work around services like geolocation and shared content and digital bodies and how do we take identity from service to service. All of those are sort of the final piece. And that is what we will be talking about today. As if that wasn't enough, we'll have people in from each of the browser teams and a lot of the libraries. And so we will cover that. So I know that was a bit of a whirlwind, but those are the key words and sort of the way they all fit together for today. And I think what's coming up next is we will have Mr. Doob, or he is the author of the 3JS library. And I recorded an interview with him earlier in the week where we are sort of go over the history and the source. And so we will roll that video.